All right, we need to talk about the Sig Sauer P320. It's a pistol I've featured on the channel multiple times. I've suggested certain configurations of it, and it was actually in the very first video I ever published on the channel because at the time, I had a P320 compact in my EDC. So a federal jury just awarded Robert Lang of Georgia $2.3 million in a product liability case against Sig Sauer. And he claimed that he was shot in the leg by his P320 while he was unholstering it, and he did not interact with the trigger. So of course, this brings up a lot of issues that the pistol has had over the years, and there's been a lot of controversy, which is why I want to address it, because I've talked about the pistol and featured it so many times, and I've started to develop my thought process as to how I will move forward with this platform and what I might suggest in order to make it more safe, I guess. So I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. Thanks to them, I can get out here and make videos like this one. And of course, even if it hurts their business model, they let me be as honest as possible as I can be with you, which I really appreciate. So big thank you to Midway USA. Now, Sig Sauer is appealing that ruling, saying that the plaintiff didn't provide the burden of proof required in order to show how the pistol itself actually discharged and whether or not it was actually faulty, and they are defending their design, saying that it's inherently safe. Now here's the thing, here's my thoughts on it. This is what I want to share with everybody because some of this stuff is kind of out there, but not everyone really has a universal understanding of it, and this is where I'm at based on years of research and data, because ever since I've owned this pistol, there's been issues, right? We started with the drop safe issue and we moved on from there, and so I've been keeping a close eye on it because, you know, I want to be safe with firearms. So first and foremost, this is my P320 M18, and you'll notice it has a manual safety on it. So in order to move forward in this conversation, I want to show you what it's like without that. So go ahead. Better than an ATF agent? Let me know in the comments. So here we have a different grip module with a different FCU, which does not have a manual safety. And this is usually the configuration you see involved with these lawsuits and with all these other issues going on with the P320 as a platform. And my conclusion as to the reason behind this is because this is akin to a 1911 with no manual safety. And what do I mean by that? The way this gun is designed and the way it functions is that the striker is fully cocked at rest, I guess you could say, right? And what that means is that the only thing keeping the striker from engaging the round is the sear safety, which has to drop and allow the striker to move forward. Or I guess that's my layman's understanding of it. Let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, but either way, this design is very similar to if you were to carry a 1911 cocked but not locked. There's no other external safety mechanism on this firearm, and it has a very light and crisp trigger pull. And some of that's due to the design of how the striker works. Well, would you carry a 1911 cocked but not locked? I wouldn't. Any 1911 I've ever carried always had the manual safety on. Yet this is a striker fired gun that doesn't have that option for you and still has a lot of the risks of carrying a single action gun with no safety. Now, the reason behind that being a problem is because this design's less forgiving than something like a Glock, let's just say, right? And what do I mean by less forgiving? Well, because there's no manual safety and because there's no external safety of any kind, and because the striker's fully cocked at rest, there's less forgiveness for interaction with the trigger. So something as minimal as a key getting stuck in your holster or something interacting with the trigger when it comes to pressure from the outside of the holster, something like that, could possibly set it off. And in fact, one of the things mentioned in the lawsuit was the lack of a trigger safety mechanism like what a Glock has. And generally, that doesn't necessarily apply to the unintentional discharge situation or negligent discharge, because that's what these really are at the end of the day, in my opinion, but we'll talk about that here in a second. The thing that is actually designed for is to make the Glock drop safe. It's not to be an actual safety for the trigger to not be engaged. However, by avoiding a trigger safety like what the Glock has, the P320, as you can see, we're clear, there's no magazine or anything in here. The P320 would allow for something that the Glock would not. And what is that? It would allow for pressure from the sides of the trigger to pull it back and to disengage the sear, which would allow the striker to then strike the round and the primer and set it off. If you did the same exact thing I just did on a Glock, it would not go off. And the reason behind that is because it has that trigger safety. Now, that generally isn't really what that's intended for, but what that does prevent is minimal pressure coming from the sides of the trigger, interacting with it and possibly setting it off, which could happen while holstering or unholstering, especially if your holster is leather or Kydex that's warped or something that could deform based on pressure or heat, right? So that's one consideration to make, okay? And that's why this reminds me of a 1911 with no safety engaged, because it basically is. It's cocked, but it's not locked, okay? Which is why I've moved over to the M18 if I'm going to use this for any serious use. If I'm going to use a P320 platform for something like self-defense, I'm going to want it to have a manual safety, because I wouldn't carry a 1911 with the safety off, so I don't want to carry this gun with the safety off either. And unfortunately, this gun is the only striker-fired pistol I own with a manual safety, and I don't feel the same way about other striker-fired guns that I own. And I especially don't feel that way about double-action, single-action guns that I own. And that's problematic because these pistols are sold in this configuration all of the time, especially to law enforcement, without any sort of disclaimer, right? Or any sort of advice about what that really looks like when things are set and ready to go. Another consideration to make in order to improve the level of safety provided by the P320, at least in my opinion, right? This is all just from my experience, my research, and the data that I've consumed over the years that has led me to these conclusions, okay? If I were to carry a P320 with no manual safety, which here, just to reiterate, this design is not unsafe. This is not inherently unsafe. I just believe it's less forgiving. And by being less forgiving and being more prone to go off during lesser amounts of interaction, there are certain steps you would want to take in order to ensure your safety, right? So one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that a lot of the claims of these guns going off on their own circle around the fact that they had a weapon-mounted light, like what you see right here. And holsters that are light-bearing allow more space around the trigger guard than holsters that don't, which means there's more space for something to get into the trigger guard and interact with it when there otherwise wouldn't be. So if I was to carry a P320 nowadays with no manual safety, I wouldn't run a weapon-mounted light on it because I'd want my trigger guard to be fully enclosed and perfectly safe. Now the problem with that is that this is a modern striker-fired pistol. And for self-defense pistols, I like having a light on my gun because, well, a lot of bad things happen at night, and having the option is good even if you decide you don't need it. So I like having a weapon-mounted light on my gun. Don't tell Wilson Combat I put one on their grip frame. But I guess it's just Ken Hackathorn. Anyway, that means that this gun is one of the few modern striker-fired, double-stack, duty quality pistols I own that I wouldn't feel comfortable putting a weapon-mounted light on. These are things to consider and to keep in mind. And this is something that, you know, has been bothering me for quite some time because I talk about these pistols a lot and I like these pistols a lot. And the military has adopted this M18 or M17 version of the pistol with the manual safety, and maybe for good reason. And a lot of these discharges aren't occurring in the military. They tend to be occurring with police because they're not running manual safeties and their pistols are getting interacted with and beat up and tossed around and all kinds of stuff on a regular basis. So things are more likely to happen in that capacity than they would be for a civilian or somebody who's concealed carrying, right? Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that I don't dislike Sig Sauer products. I regularly talk about Sig Sauer products here on the channel. I have multiple MCXs that I like quite a bit. I have a P229 that I like a lot. But this is a concern and it's an issue and it's something that's been bothering me, and this is why I wanted to address it, because now with this lawsuit going through, it does open up some doors to more questions and more possible issues moving forward. Also, keep in mind that this is the first lawsuit where the plaintiff was actually awarded monetary damages, because in all the other lawsuits brought against Sig so far, they've either been dismissed or Sig has won in some form or fashion. But now they actually lost. So they are appealing. And there's one more thing to keep in mind, which is something you have to always consider and is something that we have to be aware of, okay? Robert Zimmerman is the lawyer who was representing the plaintiff in this case, and he has been involved in almost every lawsuit brought against Sig Sauer since any of this started happening. And of course, lawfare against gun manufacturers is being used right now in order to hurt the Second Amendment in some capacity, because by making business more expensive for manufacturers. It makes the product more expensive for us, the consumer, which means less people get less guns. That's just how it works. So there is a motive to this that's malicious, but we also have to keep in mind that there are some design, I guess we'll just say, decisions that were made with this gun that may have allowed it to be persecuted in that fashion, especially if you want to talk about the drop safe issue. And just so we can cut off the comments ahead of time, the drop safe thing is not what we're talking about right now. Right now we're talking about a negligent or unintentional discharge situation occurring with the trigger being interacted with, in my opinion. The drop safe thing was a problem too, and it was remedied in a way that a lot of people didn't necessarily agree with, but it has been fixed since, and the drop safe thing is not a thing anymore, so you can stop commenting about it. But it has opened up the doors to the concept of this pistol being unsafe, and now anytime it does something that someone didn't want it to do, it's going to be targeted as not being safe, and this is exactly where we are. And here I am telling you that as someone who's worked with this platform for years and someone who has enjoyed it because it's a good shooting pistol and I find it reliable and I don't find it inherently unsafe, I do find the manual safety to be necessary if I wanted to conceal carry or carry this in a duty capacity, strictly for the reasons I mentioned before. And since I don't feel that way with other guns like my Glock, that has to make you question whether or not that's a good decision for you, because I don't feel the need to have this device on other striker-fired pistols that I own. And that's just where we're at with it. This is why I wanted to share that with you. This is why I wanted to give you my opinion and my thought process there. Keep in mind all the safety suggestions I made, just because those might help you avoid a situation on your end if this was to ever become a problem. I don't know. I don't have proof that that's exactly what's happening, but it just seems to be all of those data points massing together to show that it's not necessarily an unsafe gun that's just shooting by itself, but that the way it's designed makes it easier to have an accident with. And that's, well, problematic. And that problem seems to be able to be solved by a manual safety. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Let me know whether or not you think the P320 needs a redesign, or if whether you think it's just getting an unfair shot or whatever it is. But this is just, like I said, my opinion. Anything else you need from me at all, you can go to magicprepper.com. You can also support the channel directly if you go to my Subscribe Star, which will have links in the description as well as in the pinned comment. And that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.